Every time you speak as a leader inside of a company, people make a decision about you. Is this someone I can trust with direction or someone I need to tune out? 15 years of advising leaders across Fortune 500 companies and earlier when I was inside the Israeli Defense Forces taught me a simple truth. Leadership rises or falls on the communication that leaders have because that is how people perceive you, your ability to lead, and whether you can make the vision you have for the company a reality. And if you can't communicate like a leader, you won't be able to be trusted like one. So let me walk you through the 5 behaviors that quietly destroy your executive presence and exactly what to do instead. So let's talk about the 5 communication behaviors that are simply killing your executive presence and what it is that we can do instead. And before we dive in, we really need to understand why this matters. And most importantly, is that as you scale a company, as you grow, as you have more people, communication is your most important scaling tool because the more people you have, the larger your company is, not just in terms of its size, the number of people, or in the revenue, but also in terms of geography, meaning are you further apart? You have more states, maybe more countries. The further you and your leadership team are all the way distance from that individual contributor, all the way at the bottom that needs to understand what are we doing? What does it matter? And how does it ladder up to the vision and the strategy that we have? And that distance creates distortion from your ideas, from what you want to have accomplished. And so we need to be able to figure out how we can minimize that the most. And communication, therefore, as we scale and as we grow, this is why it is such an important communication tool, why it's such an important scaling tool to be able to use. And so therefore, if we understand that, that communication leads to clarity. Clarity ends up being the fastest way to increase execution, where we reduce that distance. Because again, you might have had a team of 5, 10, 15, and now you're at 80, 100, and 150, and so on and so forth. And so communication, that's great, leads to clarity. Clarity leads to faster execution. And you don't need to take it from me. The Oracle of Omaha, Warren Buffett said the easiest way to become worth at least 50% more is by honing your communication skills. So let's do that today. Let's figure that out. Here are the 5 issues that I've seen over and over again, and that I've also done myself. So the very first thing that is destroying your executive presence is over explaining, and not to mention hiding behind jargon. This is one of the worst things. I'm personally on a one-man mission to get the fuck rid of anything to do with low-hanging fruit and circling back. But that's a story for another day. But here's the thing. You might have the best ideas in the room, but if you can't communicate them, no one can follow. That's one of the lessons that I learned the hard way. I felt that I had phenomenal ideas, a great strategy, a way to bring alignment or a way to achieve our goals. But one of the hardest things was figuring out what are the right ways in which I can communicate that, not just so that people understand, but that people want to follow me. And so this is stuff that I've seen hurt executives. So executives that do this poorly, they're they're not fully sure what the point is. This is one of the big reasons that they overexplain. They figure out what they want to say as they're speaking because there's no forethought to what it is that I'm supposed to be saying in the first place. And so you end up speaking on and on and on and rambling. And another issue that I've seen over and over again is that many executives believe that if they provide more detail, they can provide more credibility. So if I just get whatever is in my head from me to you, then you can understand exactly what I see. And if you can understand what I see and what I think and how I see the world, then you will do so. And then therefore, we'll all get it. And you will understand how great I am and how smart I am. But that's just simply not the case. When we provide too much information and provide too much detail, it ends up confusing the person we're communicating with. And they don't ultimately understand the primary point because we just created this massive fog of like, wait, hold on, what is it that you actually want from me? And lastly, I found that a lot of executives who over explain, they're uncomfortable with silence. And so they keep talking to fill that silence. Right there. I paused, I give it a break. This is what allows people to actually take in that information. But if we're in a situation where we constantly keep talking and talking and talking, we get further and further from the point, the person becomes more and more confused. And so there are consequences to doing all this stuff. And those consequences include when we end up talking in circles, just like I said, you bury your point in the detail. And when we do that, when we over explain it and keep talking, keep talking, keep talking, people stop listening. So the very thing that we wanted from them in the first place, which is, okay, I'm going to transfer all the knowledge I have from my head to theirs, and then they'll see, and then we can get on the same page. No, the exact opposite happens. People stop listening and they don't want to actually hear what you have to say. And therefore, the point you wanted to make disappears. The second thing, the consequences of over explaining is that when we use jargon, such as the strategic value proposition enhancement for operational alignment and other bullshit like that, you don't end up sounding smarter. And this is the thing that I really messed up, especially in the beginning of my tenure. Now, the thing about jargon is that it gives us a shared language. There's a reason we feel comfortable. It's that I know that when I say, I'll circle back, and really just means like I'll communicate with you later. I'll email you later. I'll call you later. Whatever that is, I'll follow up on this. But it makes us feel so much more secure. But the thing is, when we take it to the extreme and we have things like strategic value proposition enhancement for operational alignment, instead of just saying, here's my strategy to align our teams, we might feel like we're being super smart because we're using big words, but it just ends up reducing the clarity of the communication that we have. And again, we end up bearing the point that we want to make, and we don't end up sounding smarter. We sound as if we're insecure. And then lastly, when you're uncomfortable with silence or you're worried about the wrong reactions from people, that's when we end up rambling, and that's when we lose credibility. Because again, we just keep speaking and speaking and speaking because we just hope like, oh man, uh, I can't deal with the silence, and so I'm just going to keep filling it and rambling and going on and on and on. And similarly, maybe you're not seeing the reactions that you want from the people you're communicating with, and so you end up continuing to talk because they're not giving you the right reactions. You're not getting the applause or the raised eyebrows or the smiles, and so you're just going to continue speaking because that's how else will you get the reaction that you want. And you're not alone. I did this myself. I used to over explain because I was unsure of myself. That was my big fuck up. And so I was in the same boat where I would be with clients and I'd be advising either head of communications or C-suite executives at Fortune 500 companies. And I would feel the need to clarify and make sure that they knew everything that I knew. Like, here is the way in which we are going to achieve the communication strategy and reach the market that you want. And here are all the nuances. Here are all the points that you need to know. Here are all the details. Look at all the research that I've done. And the thing is, especially with executives, and you know this, there's so much that's going on in their life. They already have a ton that's in their mind. They don't have the bandwidth, and they also don't have the interest in knowing every single tiny little intricate detail. What is the point? What do you need from me? Let me make a decision based on the primary parameters of why it is that you did what you did. And so this is something that, especially when I was junior, I used to do all the time because I thought that's how I gained credibility. And so I'd also use jargon to make myself sound smarter. And all of these created this swirl of shit that didn't really help progress me forward. And it didn't help the people that I was communicating with. And so I put together a checklist about how to fix this. So the very first thing is to figure out, how can I get my point across in 30 seconds? Now, the reason we want to figure out how do we do that within a time frame is because it puts you in a position where it's not about, well, hold on, how many slides do I have? It's not about, what length of time can I use? It is rather, how can I most quickly get across the thing I want to say in the shortest period possible? From there, it allows us to then figure out, okay, what is the primary point? What will help ultimately the person I'm speaking with understand what is most important, so that I can get rid of the fluff. It's an incredible forcing mechanism where now you end up really focused on what matters. Second part is thinking of it from this framework. What is the point? What is the reason? And then what is the decision that needs to be made? So what's the point I want to make? What is the reason that I think this is the right approach? And then here's the decision that I've taken ultimately because of that. And after that, just stop talking. I just shut up. Because at that point, I let the person digest the information, think through it themselves, and allow them the opportunity to respond so that I can make it a conversation and not a dialogue. Because Those reactions are what we were looking for before. So when we were in a situation where we kept talking and talking to fill in these silence, it didn't give the opportunity for the person to respond and let us know what actually matters to them. So though that's my quick fix checklist for dealing with over explaining. Then we move to the second issue that I've seen hurt executives over and over and over again. That is around stop letting your delivery undercut your message. Now, from the execs that I've seen, they speak too fast because they're nervous. I've seen them fidget or move constantly because they're unsure, and their tone conveys uncertainty even when they know what they want to say. So I found this a lot with executives who are nervous, or they just want to finish with the conversation, or maybe it's not something that they feel super comfortable speaking to. And so what they end up doing is that they speak too fast, and that pace of how quickly they speak makes them seem nervous, makes them seem unsure. Because in their heads, for so many people, it's, well, hold on, if I just speak really quickly, this will be over. And if it's over, I can just sit down and never have to do this again. That doesn't lead to earning people's trust or earning the credibility that you have. Then either they fidget too much. They play around with something in their hand, maybe with their hair, maybe with their glasses, keep touching their face over and over and over again because they're unsure. So that's a negative signal that we are communicating that undercuts a message. And then lastly, their tone. So even when they're sure, like they've done this a million times, they're an expert in whatever RevOps, or they're an expert in customer success, whatever that might be, just the way that their tone comes across, it kind of seems like they're unsure about what it is that they actually want to communicate. And so that ends up eroding that trust too. And so there are consequences to that, because when your pace is rushed, people assume that you're unsure. So we want to be able to slow that down. When your body language is scattered, so that you're all over the place and your hands aren't accentuating what you're saying, but they're distracting from the words that you're trying to communicate, people end up focusing on your movements and not your message, because this is a lot more engaging than whatever it is that you're speaking. And so we want to be able to ensure that whenever we're using our body language, it doesn't distract from what we're trying to communicate. And then lastly, when your tone sounds hesitant, your credibility drops, even if your ideas are strong. And when I look back and for me, kind of my fuck up is that I used to speak too fast all the time because I wanted to project certainty. I thought that if I entered a room with leaders or with individuals that I want to influence or to persuade, that the best way is to constantly speak fast at this pace and on and on and on and on, because that way you will know that I'm super confident in what I want to communicate. However, that's not the case. I think pacing, and especially speaking quickly, is important in areas where we want to show excitement or show how much we care about something in particular. But keeping it at that pace constantly just makes it overwhelming for the individual. And the thing about it, especially when it comes to executive presence, is that the best leaders, they take their time. They're not in a rush. And by being able to speak at a cadence and at a pace that is much slower, it allows the other person to actually digest what you're saying. And so that's something that's incredibly important when it comes to our executive presence. And that's something that I learned the hard way. And over time, in different leadership positions that I held, I learned to slow down my pace, and I learned to be a lot more deliberate with what I wanted to say so that it can be communicated as efficiently as possible. And so here's the checklist that I put together to make that a reality. So the very first thing is that I slowed down by 30%. So whatever pace of speaking that you have in your head, that is my normal pace, that is my cadence, that's how I want to speak. Slow it down by 30%. And I know it's going to sound hard and it's going to feel as if you're speaking in slow motion, but that is a really good benchmark for people who've never heard what you're going to say. Because again, it's in your head. You know exactly what you want to say, or this is an idea you've been mulling over, or maybe it's even part of your expertise. You're maybe an expert in psychology, and so you've known this for a very long time. But this is new information for somebody else. And so your ability to slow down to a pace where it might feel slow motion for you actually is a phenomenal pace for someone to learn and to absorb what you're saying. Then, for the majority of the time, have your hands be still outside of intentional gestures that you want to use to accentuate whatever point you want to make. Pause, then speak. Between your sentences, before you begin, give room and space for whatever you're trying to communicate. Let it breathe. That helps people digest information much more. And this is one of the most important one. Deliver the line like you expect to be heard, not like you're asking for permission. So this goes back to the tone of being uncertain. Deliver when you have to say, as if it's to be heard, understood, and acted upon, not as if you're asking for permission by uh, adding an inflection to your voice, like you're kind of asking a question, but be a lot more certain about what it is you're communicating. So that was my checklist for fixing the delivery issue. Here's a third thing that's killing your executive presence. And that is communicating without taking control of the moment. So what I've seen executives do is that they speak, but they don't set the frame. They contribute, but they don't own the direction of the conversation. And they soften language to keep alignment instead of driving alignment. So here's what I mean by that. Whenever they might be, let's say, a really important leadership meeting or meeting with other important individuals in the company where executives want to communicate something important, they might speak, but they don't set the direction of like, what is the purpose of the meeting? What do we need to get out of this? And then what are the decisions that have to be undertaken by the end of the 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 1 hour? And so they'll end up contributing, they'll end up speaking in the meeting as a leader, but they don't own the direction. And so you end up letting somebody else own it instead. And instead of being more direct with language of what we need to accomplish, why it matters, it a lot more of a soft tone. So it is an attempt to try to not rock the boat or hurt anybody's feelings, but it ends up not creating the alignment that you want, even though the language you're trying to use is very soft to try to bring everybody on board. And there are consequences to this kind of behavior. And the thing is, when we don't set the tone, and or rather we don't set the frame of what is the purpose of the conversation, the meeting, the conversation ends up drifting and somebody else defines the problem. So if you don't set it as a leader, somebody else in that room will step up and set it for you, and it might not be the focus that you want it to be. And when you don't take ownership, people leave unclear about who's driving this. Well, hold on, I thought, Jake's the is the head of RevOps. Why is it that the VP of it is taking charge here? And so that leads to a lack of clarity about who's truly in charge and who we're supposed to be listening to. And when your language is hedged, meaning you use constantly words like maybe, possibly, we could, your team starts second guessing a lot of what it is that you have to say. And so in any type of environment where you have people that are together in a group, they look for structure. They look for leadership. They look for somebody who can be able to set the tone, set the pace, set the direction. And not being able to take that control, not having that ownership, using wishy-washy language, that doesn't help somebody feel certain and feel confident and drive the alignment that teams require in order to succeed, and especially in a competitive business environment. And this is something that I also messed up as well. So my fuck up is that I used to care a lot more about creating a relationship instead of taking control and steering the interaction towards an objective. So I remember getting on so many conversations with whether it was C-suite leaders or even military commanders at the time, and I would care more about having a really, positive and nice conversation in the beginning, so that we could build a good relationship, as opposed to using the opportunity to set the frame and say, listen, we're here today because I want us to be able to understand, are we going to go with this strategy or are we going to go with this strategy? So I'm going to lay out the pros and cons for each one. And by the end of it, I will need to understand your decision and what makes you most comfortable so that we can move on and I can tell the team what it is that we need to do. And so that is stuff that ultimately did not help me earn the credibility that I wanted at the level that I needed to in order to continuously advise leaders at that level. And once I fixed that, once I was able to stop trying to care about what somebody thought of me and let them know that I care about them more, that's when the relationship changed. When they saw that I took ownership, the took the frame, said it, and used language that was direct, to the point, and was for a particular objective, that's when things moved much more quickly and I earned the trust and credibility that I wanted. So here's the checklist that I followed to make that reality. So first, it's all about setting the frame. Language that you can use is, here's the situation, here's what matters, and here's what we're trying to solve for today in the meeting and the hall and whatever that might be. Then it's about owning the direction. So we're going to do X, and here's why we're going to do that. And lastly, using language that demonstrates commitment. So we will, and the decision is. This is the way that I was able to not only start any type of interaction really well, it was the way that we began. I owned it in the middle with the direction. And then lastly, I used commitment language to be able to show where we're going next. So that was the way in which I dealt with moments where I wasn't taking control of the moment, which reduced my executive presence. Fourth thing that I've seen ruin executive presence over and over again is that people, and especially in leadership positions, they avoid hard conversations because they suck. We naturally don't run towards discomfort. We don't run towards uncomfortable conversations because we don't want that. We want to keep the harmony. We want to have that what we feel is in alignment. But the truth is that when we delay difficult decisions to keep the peace or avoid rocking um, the boat, it doesn't earn us the trust that we want. And so I've seen this over and over again from executives who kill their executive presence. They also soften the truth because they believe it's kinder. But in reality, that's not true. It's not kinder. It's nice. And being nice is not what people need from you. They need you to be kind. And to be kind is to tell somebody the truth. It is to help them understand what's important, to help them understand what it means to succeed. Being nice is just using language that's not offensive, language that seems like it's helping the person, but it's really not. And so the executives that I've seen over and over again, they avoid conversation, then they really just hope that the problem resolves itself. But it doesn't. And there are some really significant consequences to avoiding hard conversations. Because when executives avoid tension, you end up creating more tension. So if there is a team member who's not performing, everybody knows it, but you're not stepping up and letting that person know, obviously on a one-to-one basis, right? We're not here to embarrass anybody. But if people see that the issue is not being dealt with, it ends up creating more tension in your team. And when you soften the truth, people get confused or make up their own story. It's like, okay, well, I don't really know what Bill meant by that. It- the language wasn't exactly direct or clear. And so people create their own narrative because narrative is what we use to fill in the gap when we don't have a proper understanding of what's taking place. We make up a story in our own head. And when you delay issues, respect drops quietly, but also permanently. Leaders, real leaders, they don't shy away from discomfort. They actively walk towards it because they understand the constraints of business, the constraints of relationship, the constraints of anything are always going to be at that nexus where there is tension, where there's conflict, and leaders are there to help solve those issues. And so when you delay issues, when you avoid them, that's what ends up losing you the respect in the eyes of your team because they know that you're not dealing with what needs to be dealt with. And that was one of my biggest fuck ups. It was softening my language instead of being direct and kind. And so instead of saying what I needed to say or what I needed to communicate, I would try to use softer language. I would try to use language that doesn't try to offend anyone, even though it ultimately didn't help them. So I changed that. And now whenever I have any type of client interaction, I'm very direct in the beginning. I present myself and I tell people, listen, I'm incredibly direct. I am here to be able to figure out where are the communication issues and so that we can solve them. And I'm here primarily for one reason, and that is to help you win. Now that we work together, I'm on your side of the table. We are doing this together. And so anything that I say, anything that I think is wrong, anything that I think is off, anything that I think we need to fix, that is all in service of helping you win, because that is the only thing that matters. And so that is something that sets the frame for the entire relationship, so that anyone I work with, they know I'm not communicating this way, or am I being direct, or I'm not cutting something down because I want to, because I'm trying to be rude, or because I'm trying to hurt their feelings, but it's because the only thing that matters is winning. And the way we win is by being direct. The way we win is by dealing with discomfort. And the way we win is by figuring out what the problem is and solving it. And so that is something that, above all, has created some of the strongest relationships that I've ever had. And so that is something that I fixed over time in the way that I lead, in the way that I communicate with others. And so here's that checklist that I use to think through this stuff and to act even better. The first thing is to say the truth calmly. So when I have something direct to say, when I want to tell somebody that they're not communicating very well, whether that may be their delivery, maybe that's the words they're using, maybe that's the way they're approaching the entire situation, I just say the truth calmly. Here's what I've seen you do. Here's why it's not optimal. Here's what we can do better. And another thing is to take or to assign responsibility clearly. So leaders I've seen over and over again have this believe that they need to have all the answers, that they need to know everything. But if that's the case, then they can't ever be wrong. And if they can't be wrong, how can they ever take responsibility? But taking responsibility is what sets true leaders apart. Being able to say, you know what, I was wrong. I'm sorry. This wasn't the right approach. And so for me, anytime that happens, I am the first one to raise my hand and say, I was wrong. This was my responsibility. It did not end up the way we wanted it to. That earns credibility and trust with anyone that you work with. Next is to be able to give simple next steps and a path forward. So if I thought, hey, I don't think you communicated really well, the delivery was off, it didn't make me feel connected to you. Here's what I want you to do next. I want you to keep more eye contact. I want you to use more pausing. And I want you to read this sentence and be a lot more direct in the way you speak. You have to say it with certainty, not with an inflection as if you are asking a question. So that is simple next steps forward. And then lastly, treat conflict as maintenance, not a crisis. So again, in situations where you're in a room and maybe people are disagreeing, instead of trying to shy away or say, okay, well, maybe we agree to disagree, or let's table that for now, everyone. No, get into it. Let's understand, if we're all here on the same team and we're trying to achieve this goal, let us delve deeper, understand why are you recommending this step and why are you recommending that step, and understand that this is a healthy thing. And the ability to deal with those is what's going to help set the company apart. It's what's going to allow the company to scale more. But obviously, the ability to communicate well in those situations is what really matters. Then lastly, the last thing when it comes to uh, any type of behavior that kills executive presence is stop leading from your mood instead of your message. And one of the most important things that I've learned over time is that if you can't be trusted to lead others if you can't regulate yourself. That means regulate the emotions that you have. Because when we take a leadership position, we give up the ability to act emotionally. Doesn't mean we don't get to experience emotions. It doesn't mean we don't get to have emotions. It doesn't mean that we don't get to be emotional, positive or negative, about what's happening. But people are looking for someone who's steady, who's not too high, who's not too low. But whatever happens, they're that rock. That's what it means to be a leader. When people look to someone in times of crisis, in times of uncertainty, in times where they need somebody to take charge. And so some of the worst executives that I've seen, and what really ruins their executive presence, is that their emotional state dictates their communication. Their reactions end up being unpredictable. And teams spend a lot more time managing the leader rather than executing on the work itself, which is the worst position to be in. It's one of the ways you can absolutely guarantee that your company won't succeed. And there are consequences to this. So when your mood swings, people end up walking on eggshells, right? They don't tell you what you need to know. They they start being weary of interacting around you. They don't see you as someone that they can speak to and trust and be open with, but rather somebody to constantly manage. And when you're inconsistent with your behavior, your team stops acting and they start guessing. And so, okay, I don't know what he means today because that might change tomorrow. And now it's up to me to fill in the blanks or figure out what he actually wants. So that inconsistency slows down execution. And lastly, here, when your stress bleeds into your communication, trust collapses even if your strategy is right. I cannot emphasize this enough. Your strategy may be the best in the world. Your approach to something might be perfect. But if your stress constantly bleeds into what needs to happen, it puts the entire team on edge. Do you not trust where you want them to go? You need to be calm. You need to be able to lead people in a way where they feel that you have it under control. And if you have it under control, you're not worried, they shouldn't be either. And that they can just focus on the work that needs to be done. And so this is where not my personal fuck up, but my manager's fuck up is that when I was advising Fortune 500 companies and I had a managing director, and the thing is, my day would depend on his day. Meaning, if the day was good or bad, it was all based on his mood. So if he came into the office and he was just cheering, excited, and happy, I got to be that way too. But if he was pissed and he was upset and whatever, whether it was in personal life or professional, I got to feel that in the way he communicated with me, in the way I got directions, in the way I got feedback on my work, in the way we had any type of interaction. And that sucked. And that did not help this individual earn my trust over time. And so I didn't really see him as a great leader because he was inconsistent and I had to walk around eggshells. And I didn't know whether his strategy was the right one because I didn't know whether it was based on the actual proper approach and the best way to solve a communication problem, or whether it was because uh, he was upset. And so this is just an immediate reaction to solving a problem. And so that was his fuck up. And he did not earn my trust that way. But there is a way to fix it. So the way that I would look at, try to deal with this issue, and it's something that I've looked to do myself as well when I've noticed people doing it wrong. Ask, well, how can I improve from here? What can I learn from this? And for me, it was always regulate before you communicate. So good mood or bad, center myself, look at something objectively, and try to communicate it in the most calm and objective way possible. And that meant also delivering everything that I communicate in the same tone, whether it's in calm or chaos. So whether I was in the military and we're at war, or we're in peace and we just have some type of communication with a journalist, let's say that we wanted to give them some briefing about an intelligence matter, whether in war, whether in these calm moments, my tone was always the same. And so people knew that I was going to behave in a certain way, no matter what the situation, no matter what my personal mood, no matter what the external circumstances. And that gave them calm. That earned me trust. Lastly, I was consistent in my language when I used to describe a direction. So my direction, my strategy, the way in which I communicated didn't change based on my mood. It didn't affect how I spoke. It didn't affect the way I led. I was always consistent, so people knew what to expect from me. And because I was consistent every single time, they knew what they need to do. Execution ramped up. And lastly, I removed emotion from the message and I kept the conviction. So if I was upset, people didn't feel it. If I was super excited, maybe they felt a little bit, but it wasn't what led. More importantly, it was the conviction in my voice, using the right language, setting the frame like we talked about before. And that is what helped put all of that together. That is how I solved one of the biggest issues, which is leading from mood instead of message. This is one of the worst things that destroys executive presence. Executive presence isn't about charisma, it's about trust. And trust is built by removing the behaviors that make you look uncertain. So we need clarity, we need calm, we need consistency. And these three traits, more than any strategy, any roadmap, any key objective, determine whether your company moves fast or stalls. And if you eliminate these 5 weak behaviors, you'll communicate with authority, earn trust faster, and lead with the clarity your team desperately wants from you. So if you want to learn more about leading with authentic authority, I'm going to link that video right about up here. And if you want to tackle these executive presence issues so that you can lead like the authority that you are, you can DM me 313 on Instagram or DM me on LinkedIn. And until next time, keep leading with clarity.